Good evening. Welcome. I would like to call the Curriculum and Policy Committee meeting for the Portland Board of Public Education to order at 6:04 on Wednesday, February 12th, 2025. I am the committee chair, Julianne Opperman, and we're presenting via Zoom. We have two presentations tonight. The first is a special education opportunity review from the district management group. It's stated at Strategic Plan Initiative 2.5. And then the second is a data walkthrough on Strategic Initiatives 2.1 and 2.2. From introductions, I think I can see that from our excellent member Lucira Ali is here. Chair Lentz is here. Tess Powers and Hannah Kane, who are both from the district management group. Dr. Warren, Dr. Ahmed, Dr. Applegate, and Dr. Mercado are all here from administration. And we expect some other administration people in a bit. So Dr. Scallon is present and accounted for as well. So I'll hand it over to you, Sarah. Dr. Warren.
Great. Thank you very much. It's
actually public comment.
Oh, yeah, public comment. That's right. Yep.
And we do have a few public people, so that's awesome. Although we do have Mickey and Fatuma who are need to be moved over. If anyone wishes to give public comment, would they please raise their hand? And I'm not going to read the whole kit and caboodle. No. So I'm going to close public comment and now hand it over to Dr. Warren.
Great. Thank you very much. So good evening, everybody. We are really happy to be here to present on Strategic Initiative 2.5, which is the strategic initiative that focuses on our special education continuum and strengthening that continuum in our schools. We are very pleased to have our partners and consultants from the district management group with us tonight. They will be leading the presentation, but I am joined here by Director Jesse Applegate, our Director of Special Education. I'm going to let the district management group team introduce themselves once they start. I did just want to give one little bit of framing here. First of all, we have been in this process since about November, late November. And as the district management group team can tell you, that is a very fast track process that we've been on. And we've been intentional about trying to move this relatively quickly so that we could take the input from this process and the planning that comes out of it and feed that into our budget proposal, as well as making sure that we are ready with some plans for the coming school year so that we can keep moving in this effort to improve our special education work. A technical note for anyone who may have looked at the materials online earlier on board docs. We had one change in a slide 25. So the materials were changed this afternoon. So if you had downloaded them previously, please go back to board docs to see the updated version. And there's also a slide deck there that just gives an overview of special education, which will not be presented tonight. It's just there for people's background in case maybe you're not as familiar with special education as some of the other topics that we cover. And it's just a good introduction that our colleagues here from DMG put together for us. So with that, I will turn it over. I just want to make sure that people understand that we're in the middle of the process still, really. This is the initial set of findings and recommendations. We're looking for, questions and feedback. And then from here, we'll move to some more concrete recommendations attached to next year and beyond so that we can get a little bit more concrete in our planning. So I will turn over to Tess Nicholson Powers now.
Great. All right. Well, thank you and good evening, all. Thanks so much for having us. And as Sarah said, my name is Tess Nicholson Powers. I am a director at District Management Group, and I know I've met many of you before, but do just want to say we at District Management Group, our mission is to create systemic change in public education through the use of both educational best practices, but also management best practices. So you'll really see that tonight in our presentation, in our materials. How do you ensure to have a steadfast focus on student outcomes, but also strategic resource allocation and operational efficiency to see outcomes for students. So that's who we are. I am joined by my colleagues Talia Mercado and Hannah Kane, who will be supporting in the background and are responsible for a lot of what I'm going to share tonight. I myself started my career as a classroom teacher in New York City, so this work is very near and dear to my heart. Over a third of my kids every year had IEPs, and so I just really am privileged to be able to partner with the district on this work that is so important for our students. I've now done this work with 60 plus districts across the country, from here on the East Coast to West Coast. So excited to be sharing with you all. So I'm going to pull up my screen here and we are going to dive right in. Great. All right, so I'm going to do a quick project overview and just explain the methodology for how we got here. Then we'll spend the majority of time on the opportunities before we talk next steps. How this is going to work tonight is I am going to just present the whole initial findings, and then we'll do questions at the end to make sure that we can get through everything and don't run short on time. So please do, if you have a pencil next to you or a pen, be taking notes for any questions so we can go back to appropriate slides and places as we need. So Sarah already did this for me, but just to really ground why this work started in the first place, it was truly driven by the district's strategic plan to improve achievement, specifically to develop the capacity of schools to provide more effective instruction to students with disabilities across the continuum of services. And I think and I'll call this out later, but just want to say, I think being able to really take action on the strategic plan in the short time frame we have just shows the district's commitment to its well thought out strategy. So that really informed our project goals and partnership when we started. So overall goals here, and I know just in listening to previous committee meetings, it was really important for the district and you all to develop that deep understanding of current practice related to special education, then explore alignment to best practice to ultimately identify what are the top opportunities, not every opportunity, but the top ones that are going to be able to align staff practice to best practice to improve student outcomes while also improving the work life of teachers given the amount they have on their plate. So those are our guiding goals. How we've done this work starting in November, we started by convening an advisory group who has been advising us, and I'll talk about them more. Overall, just started collecting a lot of data, communicating to stakeholders. We spoke to lots of folks in focus groups and interviews. We conducted a time study that I'll talk about, and all of that is kind of wrapping now with our final findings. As Sarah said, we are not done here with the findings. We previewed with district leadership, we've shared with the advisory group, and here we are tonight sharing with the curriculum and policy committee. We also, Sarah and Jesse had the opportunity to share with school leaders and special education coordinators. So we'll be using all of that sharing and feedback to refine our findings and ultimately walk away with very clear next steps on what opportunities will be implemented starting this year, next year, and beyond. So that is where we are, and I just want to, name how intentional we were with this last piece to really involve stakeholders not only at the beginning, but at the end as well. So little more detail here, just how we got to our findings, a lot of qualitative evidence combined with quantitative evidence, and much more data that we reviewed. Some you saw in the appendix to get those high leverage opportunities. But I do just want to spend a moment to highlight the just breadth of community input we got. I would say even more input than often we see from other districts, which I think really is a testament to people's commitment to special education in the district and wanting to engage. So we conducted 20 one-on-one interviews with district leaders, 39 focus groups with 137 participants. We conducted family community meetings in English, Spanish, Portuguese, French, and Somali. We had 56 participants then in January. We conducted classroom observations across 8 schools and went into 30 classrooms. We had a staff survey that 208 participants responded to, and then we did a family survey where we had 254 participants representing 4 languages. The survey was available in 39 languages, but those were the responses we received. So I think this is just so important to highlight because, one, we feel very confident that our recommendations are representative of the many key stakeholders from staff, families, etc., that represent what we think is going to be most high impact, while also being feasible based on their input. The other piece that I want to talk about is our staff schedule sharing. So we conducted a time study over the course of a week in December. And the purpose of this is we know that special education teachers and other staff members have many more responsibilities than just instructing students on a day-to-day basis. And so being able to take a systemic look at how is time being spent, how much time is with students versus paperwork versus all the other activities that need to be completed, how many students are teachers seeing at one time. We had great participation, as you can see here. So again, just makes us feel confident in that quality of data received. I will say these staff members also provided open-ended feedback in addition to what you already saw, the 208 staff members. So even more qualitative feedback from staff as well. And then the last piece of the methodology is this advisory group. So a diverse group of district leaders, school leaders, staff members, teachers, ed techs, board member, community engagement specialists, etc., really from all levels of the district. And we met with this group before we started any work to really get their perspective and insight on what did they see as the greatest areas of strength in the district versus areas of opportunity, and how could we start to gather and craft their feedback in a way to guide our analysis. We then shared these findings in even more depth that we'll share with you tonight, and we will meet with them again to do some planning moving forward. So I think just this group has been so critical in ensuring that any recommendation truly is going to meet the needs in Portland while also being feasible. So that's the methodology. Going on to your district, these numbers are probably very familiar to you and live in your head, but do always just like to ground because culture and context is unique. And one thing I want to call out in Portland is 21% of students have an IEP, so an individualized education program, and 4% of students have 504. So that means you have 25% of students in Portland who has some sort of specialized learning plan, 1 in 4 students. So that's just a lot of students that we're talking about. And so I just want to keep that in mind as we go, as we talk about these recommendations, these are the students that we are aiming to impact and improve outcomes for. So before I get into the opportunities, always like to start with all of the great things that we heard, and there were many more on this list. But for some commendations that we wanted to make sure we call out, the first was just really observed dedicated and committed staff. This was not only in our own conversations with staff, but as we heard staff talking about one another, this was evident in the family feedback we received, which obviously is critical to any change that you want to make, having that foundation. The second was the addition of the special education coordinator role. It is a new role this year, so likely will continue to be refined, but heard really positive feedback from staff and school leaders on their ability to support and especially reduce some administrative burden from staff to focus on other priorities. Heard similar things about the community engagement specialist role and the role they've been able to play in supporting staff and families navigate the special education system, especially for non-English speaking families in the district. And then lastly, and I mentioned this earlier, but it deserves its own place here on the slide, just really being able to see that strategic plan in action. I do a lot of strategic planning work. I sometimes see them sit on a shelf, but it really is alive in the work that you all are doing every day. It's evident in talking to staff and even just how you are aligning your resources. And so being able to see how this work fits into your overall district strategy is a very powerful and strong place to be starting. So all the great things, many more that could be added to this list, but I am going to jump us into the opportunities. And as I do this, and as we were framing our opportunities and recommendations, we really wanted to frame it in the student experience and the continuum of services they receive. We're talking about students receiving special education services, but it's important to note that they often are in the general education setting as well. So in mapping out their experience, many students receive Tier 1 instruction in the general education setting. And if that is not working for them and they need additional support, they may receive what we call RTI, response to intervention. They're getting some intervention, extra support to be able to meet their needs. When that is no longer working, often then an IEP is developed or a student is referred. And this is a legal document, but it really is the make or break for being able to serve a student's unique needs versus something else. And we'll talk more in depth there. Once a student has an IEP, they may be receiving support for more of a mild to moderate disability, or they may have a higher need and require some specialized programming. And if that isn't working, may then explore an out-of-district placement. So we show all of this just to show kind of the whole scope of how a student is engaging with the district, the services that they may receive, etc. We really focused our analysis on these yellow areas here because these are where a student, has gotten an IEP, is receiving special education services. Tier 1 RTI is very important, but in the spirit of focusing and prioritizing, these are the 3 areas we'll discuss tonight. I also wanted to say that in order to have a smooth, even winding road, it's really important to have a couple conditions in place for success. So the first thing is data practices. Having really solid data practices within the district to be able to manage this process to ensure that students are getting the right supports. And then the other piece is family engagement. Once internally you're able to develop and provide services to students, ensuring that there is meaningful engagement with families, given just that partnership that needs to be in place for effective supports in school and at home. So again, this is how we look at the overall student experience, what we are going to focus on. And really the story here is if we can focus on IEP development, these supports for students with mild to moderate specialized programming, and data practices and family engagement are in place, then we will be able to support the majority of our students with disabilities effectively. So I'm going to dive into each of these opportunities more in depth, and I'll read each of them as we get there. The structure of this is I will share the opportunity, I'll share current practice reflections, and then recommendations going forward. So this first critical piece is around data practices. So strengthening data practices by collecting quality IEP and student achievement data, cultivating a culture of analysis and using actionable insights to inform equitable and effective decision-making on student services. So we start here just given how foundational it is to everything else. And how we assessed current practice is we reviewed Portland's IEP data management system Acuity, where all information on student services is housed. So it's a big data warehouse. And we took a look at what types of services were students receiving, like literacy, numeracy, social skills. Where were they receiving that service? Push in, pull out, a breathe program, etc. Who is responsible for providing that service? And what is the frequency of that service? And what we found when we looked at the actual service name, there were about 1,500 unique entries. This can make it very difficult to synthesize information and draw trends on our students now receiving more services in social skills or literacy or numeracy, and what does that mean for how we need to support students or allocate our resources. When we looked at location, here actually the options were too specific. There were only 3 options related to special education, regular education, or special and regular education. This makes it challenging to actually track any trends in where students are being served. And what's most important here is being able to monitor are students receiving services in the least restrictive environment for them so that they can be with their peers as much as possible. So without that data, difficult to draw those trends. Staff responsible, we found 37% of entries are blank, which can cause some confusion and lack of clarity on service provider. And then frequency of services, 28% of entries were left blank. And overall, it was just inconsistent in how they were written. Was it by week, by month, by year, etc., which can create some inconsistencies and also make it difficult for families to really understand, okay, what should I expect the services my students receiving, the frequency of those services, etc. So there's a lot of numbers here, but just to kind of zoom out for a moment, data is so important to be able to develop quality IEPs that meet the needs of students. All students are unique, they have specific needs, and being able to track that in a way that is going to best support them, best be able to communicate it to families, and then on a systemic level be able to use and make decisions on is so important. So how we have crafted our future considerations and recommendations is into these short-term and long-term buckets, which are further going to be broken down by the advisory group with specific timelines and owners, etc. But for now, and when we work with districts to really strengthen data systems, there's 3 key parts around: do you have quality data? Do you have the capacity to manage the data? And do you actually have a culture of data analysis? So in the short term, outlining and streamlining those data entry requirements, actually outlining the non-negotiables for data entry to ensure that it is standardized and you can use it. Then being able to understand with Acuity, the data management system, what their capabilities are to make sure that any standardization you want to do is possible. So that's just getting everything cleaned up. Then the capacity. So this is where accountability comes in. Once you put these things in place, there needs to be an owner or a team who actually manages this data to ensure cohesion, to be able to do, not very difficult, but similar analysis to we just shared with you to ensure progress is being made and things are cohesive among the district. And then lastly, once you get that in place, being able to regularly review that data, monitor and adjust anything you're seeing. And again, one of the key components of why this data is important is to understand are students being served in the least restrictive environment. So data, we start there. It is so important to everything else. But again, I do just want to make that connection. It's important for staff to have fluency here, to be able to better support students and families. That's why we talk about it. And this is very tied to the next opportunity around IEP development, where we're saying create and refine structures for all levels of the IEP development process in order to increase staff capacity and ensure consistency and quality across the district. This is a legal document, but it also can be an incredibly useful blueprint for how a student is going to be served. And that's the purpose. So how we assessed current practice, the Maine Department of Education actually does an audit every few years on every district in Maine. And so we use the audit from last school year where Maine reviewed 59 IEPs against 63 criteria. Now, 63 criteria is a lot. And while each piece of that is important, in our work with districts, we have really found there are 4 key components within the IEP that, if done well, will have the greatest impact on student outcomes. So we assessed of those IEPs reviewed, what percent of them actually identified the specific need. So this is called the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. You may have heard it as the PLAF statement, but in simple terms, just have we correctly identified student need? Then there's a section that outlines a student goals that should be aligned to those needs, the actual services, which should be aligned to the goals. And then there's a section to describe whether or not a student is going to be in a more restrictive environment or not, to make sure, again, that students can be educated and part of classrooms with their peers as much as possible. So again, there were 63 criteria. These are really the highest for impact that we looked at, and they all build on each other. So we took a look at those IEPs reviewed and said, was there evidence of was there clear evidence that these key components were in place or not? So here we first started looking at students with academic needs. So you're looking here at the academic IEPs that Maine reviewed and their assessment of whether this certain criteria was evident or not evident in the IEP. So I'm just going to take us to that first bar, which talks about gaps identified. So the first step, did you appropriately identify gaps? Maine assessed that 44% of IEPs had appropriately identified those gaps. 57% had not. And then you can see goals and services aligned to needs going forward. So just essentially what this is saying is majority of IEPs did not provide all evidence to identify needs. They were able to a bit better identify specific goals. And Maine said that, yes, most services were aligned to the goals in the IEP. When you look at functional goals in IEPs, very similar story here actually in terms of the different components. And this is important, I think, because it's not just, academics or functional we need to work on, but more systemically, how do we drive home these key components? And then for LRE, you can see here about 59% of IEPs really mapping out why a student would need to be in a more restrictive environment. So this this is a lot of data, but I think really what this is saying is there are some critical components that staff may need support and development on to ensure that students are having their needs identified and met. And one thing I want to call out, it was interesting to us that Maine assessed that 91% of services were aligned to goals. However, as you can see, they said only 61% of goals were actually measurable. So this all builds upon each other. They can't be looked at in isolation. And so I think it's most important to start with those needs and goals before you can do anything else and determine how to serve a student. So here with IEP development, this probably one comes natural, is just strengthening and honing in on those critical components. I mentioned there are 63. We fundamentally believe focusing on identifying need, writing strong goals, aligning services, and getting a deep understanding of LRE is going to have the greatest impact. And once you have that all assessed and within Portland, what that's going to look like, developing an approach to professional learning to support staff members in actually implementing this. And longer term then, once you have the system in place, you've developed staff, creating an ongoing review cycle so that you can identify any areas that need support, in a year, in 2 years, etc., as we would expect things to change. And something to consider here, and this is, much longer term, you have this role of the special education coordinator. They really are the experts here with the IEP and working with staff. And so being able to determine, are they going to play a role in this IEP review cycle as part of their priorities to support this overall initiative? So a lot here with IEP development, but just taking a step back again, a student's services start with their IEP. And so being able to have a really strong IEP that identifies the right needs is how students will be successful. If you identify a need that maybe is not based on data or not the true need of a student, it's going to be very difficult for that student to make progress moving forward, for a family member to support in that way, which is why we really spend time here. So moving on to then, okay, what does this actually look like? We've got data, we have strong IEPs. What are supports for students with mild to moderate disabilities? And recommendation here is around enhancing support for students with mild to moderate disabilities by fostering stronger staff collaboration, establishing scheduling priorities, and offering comprehensive special education focused development for all staff members. The key thing here is a student with a mild to moderate disability is likely in the general education setting a lot of the day. So it's not just the special education teacher who is responsible for teaching students with mild to moderate. So similar here, we looked at some key components that we assess when looking at supports for students with mild to moderate disabilities. And those are collaboration, given what I just said around a lot of adults working with the student, scheduling, the actual technical piece of the day to support time for staff to collaborate, and then the learning and development that all staff get. So around collaboration, we actually spoke to and surveyed teachers and looked at the time study. And what we found is that across the board, general education, special education, ESOL teachers, and ed techs reported they have limited time to collaborate around supporting students with IEPs, which implications of that can be inconsistent instructional support, limited ability to really individualize, and can be incredibly stressful for teachers, just knowing they, of course, want to support all the needs of the students. When it comes to scheduling, and there's a lot of data in here that I'll summarize, but we heard about a lot of scheduling constraints and then saw in the data that special education teachers reported spending between 32 to 75% of their time with students. The average was around 57. And social workers and speech therapists, some critical support teacher roles, reported spending the majority of their time in groups of 1 or 2 students. So the reason I highlight this in time is just sometimes we see the schedule actually getting in the way of being able to provide the direct service because students can't be pulled out, etc. Or if there's just not clear guidance on time use, you can see this variation across the district. When we think about group size, again, the schedule can be a barrier, and oftentimes social workers can successfully work with groups of students up to 3 to 5. And so being really thoughtful about scheduling to expand their reach so that they're able to see small groups of students when appropriate to be able to meet those needs without having to do so many individual sessions. And then the last piece here is around professional development and learning. So again, got feedback from those staff, same members, that they are craving more development in meeting the needs of students with disabilities. And just with the changing landscape and increasing student needs, this is more important, I would say, in all districts across the country now, so more than ever. So in terms of recommendations here, short-term, long-term, first, just developing an approach to build and monitor those special education and related service provider schedules to be able to see on an ongoing basis how are staff spending their time, what are the barriers that they're facing to be able to see students when they want to be able to remove those throughout the year. And really, as part of this, being able to prioritize time for co-planning between general education, special education to support students with mild to moderate disabilities. This PD recommendation could go across all, and I think will be a lens we look at as we put together the actual action plan moving forward. But just thinking about different models of professional learning, whether that's your typical sit and get PD or modules or coaching, etc., what is going to be the best vehicle for this type of PD required. And then long-term, just being able to evaluate the effectiveness of your PD to adjust and potentially look into what would instructional coaching look specifically for special educators. You know, there's instructional coaches, they typically are just supporting general education teachers, but special education teachers would greatly benefit from that as well. And the last piece here, this is a meaty one, is development for ed techs. They play such a critical role in student support and just the nature of the role, and many across the district being able to place a targeted focus to think about what are the key components of their role that they should be focused on, and even what are the things that maybe they shouldn't be focused on, and being intentional about that, especially as they are onboarding. So this was a very meaty section, but I'm going to move us along to specialized programming here. And this is to develop a district-wide vision and strategic plan for specialized programming with clear goals, resource allocation, defined management roles, and targeted professional development to ensure alignment, effective operations, staff readiness to support students with the highest needs. So before we dive into current practice, did just want to make sure that everyone watching had an understanding of when we say specialized programs, what are we talking about? So on the left here, you can see all the various programs that Portland offers. You can see a short description of those programs and their purpose, and the number of classrooms that are available across the district at each level. So this represents a little over 200 students, about 3% of the district's enrollment in these specialized programs. And the framework that we took here, and this is really where we bring our lens of educational and management best practices, taking a look at the strategy of the programs, the implementation structures of the program, and then what stakeholder engagement and communication exists to ensure they are successful. So we actually took this framework and assessed each of the specialized programs against that criteria. So you can see the programs on the left and then those criteria at the top. And we assessed really looking at documentation, whether something was in place, partially in place, or not in place. So for the portfolio of programs you have, yes, there is a clear vision, documented description for those top 3 programs. For resource allocation, there are clear staffing formulas that the district is within the limits of across the programs. When we get into implementation, so, okay, on the ground every single day, what does this look like? What do staff have to be successful? Currently, there's no defined program management around who has decision-making power, what is the role of central office, school leaders, staff, etc., which really is critical to program success. For staff development, we saw this partially in place when we talked to staff in these programs. Many of them reported that they themselves are often having to find development, not necessarily a systemic-wide approach. And then classroom structures and materials here, you can see partially in place, a little more nuanced there across the board. So when we see this, just really the key focus has to be on implementation to make sure that all the thought that has gone in previously to these programs have the systems and structures they need to be successful. The one program we won't talk about tonight, but we are exploring based on feedback from the advisory group and other conversations, is around a therapeutic day program, which Portland did have several years ago, then went away. And so what our team is doing right now is just getting a deeper understanding of, okay, what worked and didn't work in Portland about that program. And now in 2025, what are the conditions that would need to be in place and structures for something like that to be successful if there is a need? So I just wanted to mention that that is ongoing, but not something we'll be talking about tonight. So in terms of short-term, long-term here, you can see we've aligned it directly to the framework, but top of mind this year really will be to make sure that not only are those visions codified for programs, but there are actual measurable goals that can tell you this program has been successful or not. That is one of the biggest pieces we see missing from a lot of programming across districts and important in being able to measure success or not. Also heard loud and clear from school leaders, especially being able to define and document decision-making authority and clear roles and responsibilities for all key stakeholders to ensure these programs can run effectively. And then you can see some other pieces here around just making sure staffing formulas are up to date, staff have ongoing development, and that once all of this is in place, there's some clear structured stakeholder engagement and communication. So that wraps up specialized programming here. And as I said, we've had a lot of conversations with the advisory group and gotten good feedback on what some immediate next steps may be this year. So the last thing I'm going to talk about before we have a discussion and questions is around family engagement. So here, developing a comprehensive family engagement plan that includes increased access to multilingual resources, guidance for staff on effective family communication, and the establishment potentially of a special education parent advisory council, CPAC, to foster collaboration and advocacy. And what we heard from families, we summarized here, and this was based on family meetings, focus groups, and family survey. 4 things rose to the surface. So one was equity and accessibility concerns. So families navigating the system with limited resources, or again, often non-English speakers. Lack of communication in terms of responses or just progress on student IEPs. Parent advocacy burden, often feeling like they had to fight for services versus district being more proactive. And then lastly, and this was really interesting to us because it did focus, we don't always hear this when we talk to families related to this topic, but families actually commenting on the lack of adequate training and resources for staff. So I think that's very tied to what we've been talking about and just the importance of staff support and development. So here, short-term, long long-term, just increasing access to information for non-English speaking families. We did have a really good conversation with the advisory group, and this may not mean translated documents even, but just how do you facilitate an IEP meeting effectively to engage non-English speaking families, which is very tied to then what guidance do staff have as part of their professional learning to really meaningfully engage with all families. And then long term, and I will say, and we got good feedback from folks that this may be more challenging in Portland, just given the diversity of languages spoken and wanting to ensure inclusivity in any type of parental advisory group, but exploring, as many districts have, a parent advisory committee to be ongoingly engaged in this work. So I just shared a lot with you, but what I want to wrap us up with is just focus, if we take a step back, 5 opportunities here that really I do think build on each other in many ways. In the spirit of prioritizing, based on the feedback we've gotten thus far, it's likely these 2 are where the focus will be. And I wanted to just share with you the feedback from the advisory group on these. So around IEP development, the advisory group said strengthening IEP structures would improve consistency across schools and grade levels, making case management more efficient and ensuring services are better aligned with student needs. A more structured, strengths-based approach that honors family input while balancing special education requirements could lead to better outcomes for students. And then for specialized programming, they said codifying a clear vision, defining roles, and fostering collaboration across programs would improve consistency, inclusion, and accountability, ensuring students receive appropriate support and experience better outcomes. And so this is a synthesis of all the feedback we got from them, and I think it really does place the focus on student outcomes and even honoring families as partners in this work. So just as next steps, we're about to have a conversation. We're meeting again with the advisory group on February 28th to put a timeline to these plans before we can meet with the school board and present an executive summary version of these findings to them. But that was a lot for me, so I want to make sure we can stop here and just have some time for conversation, questions, etc.
Thank you, Tess. You're right, quite a bit, and I've seen it before, so it's easier for me to absorb it. So I'm sure others may have some thinking to do or thinking of it later. But are there any thoughts or questions from anyone, particularly? Yusira?
Hi, thank you so much for all that information. That was amazing. I just had a clarifying question. On slide 15, when you talked about the entries, is the inconsistent entry or leaving the entries blank due to lack of training, or was it lack of time? Not time, but capacity. I just wanted to understand why those were not caught or why they happened in the first place.
Yep. Yeah, so I'm going to pull up so folks know what we're referring to. So yeah, in terms of these blank entries, based on our conversations and feedback with the advisory group, it seems that just based currently on how the tool is actually set up, it may not flag in the system like, oh, you didn't, sometimes when you're filling out a form, it's like, you cannot move on. You have not completed this. So in this instance, the tool isn't doing that check. And then just in conversations with staff, we did hear they would appreciate more guidance around exactly, what are some of these critical components. And so in that instance, we hypothesize just, some staff may not be as familiar with all the components needed to complete and track. Jesse, feel free to add to that.
No, I think that's a fair summary of that, Tess. Thank you.
And so am I correct in understanding that your recommendations are not active, like right now being incorporated, but you're still in the process of finding more information and putting it together something to present to the board, like you said at the end? Okay, I think that answers my question. And just more to that, like how long would it take for, let's say, a program to be implemented? I know it's like a difficult question, but and how much time would it take to see the benefit or the impact of the program on the students? And then my second question to that is, what are the specific ways that you measure success of a program?
Yeah. Yeah, those are great questions. So I think in terms of how long it takes to get a program up and running really depends on the capacity that the district currently has with, like, do you have the people? Do you have a leader of a program, et cetera? But so I think the first step will be, if you were to introduce a new program, defining, okay, what are the things that we need in place? Like what resources? That means people, that means materials, that means physical space, et cetera, assessing where you are there. And then once you have that vision, defining, yes, how are we going to define success? Which what we would recommend is, after 1 year, you may have some success metrics that look different for what the success metrics in 3 years are going to be, so that you can build upon that way. But the most common, I would say, success metrics with programs would be some type of student outcome metric data, some type of staff perception metric data, and then also taking a look and being able to track resources allocated to a program to then be able to see, are the resources we are allocating to this program getting the results we would expect? So kind of threefold there: student outcomes, staff perception, and resource allocation.
Mickey.
Thank you. I'm sorry, my camera has an issue, so I'm there.
All right.
Tess, good to see you again, and thank you to all the DM team to have those funding. I'm kind of little my breath being taken away by see all those fundings, even though I was not surprised for years. I'm not really surprised. So I think I'm just going to hold some of my questions until you come up with everything else. But I have just two clarification. One, I think one of the slides on the IEP review cycles, when you are proposing developing IEP review cycle. So I just want to understand that side. That one can work better in our system if we have a best scheduling standard for the teachers, or the staff or the system to follow each of our students with IEPs, right?
Yeah, I would say the scheduling one, though, and the IEP review cycles are actually somewhat separate. The scheduling the scheduling is important to, make sure students are getting their services and staff have appropriate time to receive their services. So more in like the implementation.
Right.
The review cycle that we're talking about typically is best played by a position like the special education coordinator that, kind of on an ongoing basis, you're just taking a sampling of IEPs to be able to look for trends across the districts and maybe say, hey, right now our staff may need more support in writing high quality goals. So our next development is going to be focused on that. So it's kind of a proactive way to ensure that on a systemic level, you're addressing the needs of what can make for the strongest IEPs.
All right. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. And I am still shocked with the summary plan for each program. Can you go back to that slide, please?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. So are you, this is what my clear question is about. So that means we may have all the strategy in place. So when I see, then we are totally locked on the program management, or all of them. This is where you have fun.
Yes.
Right? So
Yep.
I mean, when you see, when I know we have some implementation, we have some 5-year strategic plan. So what on your recommendation for now, where we can start? I know
Yeah.
we have a staff issues, but because this is not making no sense to me for being on the board for years, and then figure out, and we really have that program management issue with those most needed of our students. And I just say that because we have lost a lot of students, they're all gone. So that means, and I try to figure out what kind of service did we offer. I know that we have offered some of kind of services, but when I see what we have now, like, the management is the key of everything to run the program on different aspects. So what's your advice?
Yep. Yeah, I would
Just
say
for short term. That's my key for short term.
For short term, I would say this year, sitting down and with, kind of some cross-functional representative of staff member, school leader, district leader, mapping
Right.
out what are the roles and responsibilities of central office, of the school leader who houses the program, and the staff members within the program, which typically would be the teacher and the ed tech, and how do those intersect with one another. One of the key areas even deeper in that I think needs to be refined is around even just decision making on some of these programs. Like, yes, this is a district program, but they do live in buildings, under school leaders. And so really clarifying what that means around decision making of programming is where I see the biggest impact, and something that you can do this year to hit the ground, running and already improve this year.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Tess. Thank you, Juliana.
Yusra.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on my last question. I asked on how long would it take to see benefit, but I just want to ask like a sort of different question to that. Like, how long, do you have any sense of how long it will take to implement your recommendations? Is it 1 year, couple years?
Yeah.
And then I'll ask my second question.
Yeah, it's really going to depend on the recommendation. And this is what we'll do with the advisory group on February 28th is we'll take a look at all the recommendations and say, okay, this is what we think can be accomplished this year. So for example, the one that I just spoke about to Mickey around program management, like that can be outlined this year. By the end of the year, there should be clear program management protocols for each of the specialized programs. There may be other things then, like strengthening IEP development, that work starts this year. Maybe the actual PD is happening in the summer for staff, and so that's going to be done by September 2025. Then there may be some things that you don't start for 2 years, and that's okay. So it's really going to depend on each of the specific recommendations, and that's kind of the next step of where we'll go, is making sure that each recommendation, instead of short-term, long-term, it's like, okay, it's March 2025, it's September 2025, or September 2026.
And when did you say the full board will get this results? And when you do, will you be giving us an idea of how your findings and your recommendations, like what that will mean for budget?
Yeah, so depending what is prioritized for this year, obviously some of that could have budget implications. So yes, on our March 4th meeting, we'll bring, here are the immediate next steps, say in the next year, and some of what those budget implications may be.
Can I just add to that a little bit that, well, first of all, going back to the prior question, because I think it's relevant to the question around budget, that when we make these recommendations in the next stage and bring this presentation on the 4th, instead of seeing short-term and long-term recommendations, you will see it bucketed out by the things that we're recommending to do, and district management group is recommending, with the sort of blessing of our advisory group, that we would do this year before the end of the year, what we do next year, and then what we do in the 2 to 3 years following. So our goal is to kind of have basically like a 5-year plan, but really broken out. So we're clear on what's next year. we have already, because we can't wait until this is all finished, we've been building our budget. And, you know, Jesse and I have been working very closely with the district management group all the way through. So we've sort of been talking back and forth. We've done our best to start drafting a budget based on what we already think and know. And the truth is that, you know, that might have to shift a little bit once we get the final recommendations. And, you know, a budget is always sort of a plan, and then may also have to be shifted as we're implementing whatever, you know, the final recommendations are, because we're certainly going to be learning along the way as we're doing this. But we're sort of, because of the timing of it all, even though we've rushed our friends to help us through this process really quickly, we've still been trying, you know, to do both in parallel, basically, and do our best to come up with a logical budget.
Thank you. One last question. I agree. Like, I really appreciated that you gave us these are the two buckets that should be, or the committee said to focus on. That was going to be my question, but I really appreciated that. Is there a reason, and this can be for central office, but is there a reason why we are not kind of thinking about out of district students, and like what does that mean basically?
You want me to answer that one, Tess?
Yeah. And I mean, I can, from our perspective, just in terms of where we see the greatest impact opportunities that are also feasible, out of district placements kind of didn't meet that criteria when we looked at the whole continuum. You know, there's obviously some students you are sending out of district. It is not honestly as large as even we see in many other districts right now. So for this kind of initial opportunity review, we really feel that, again, we always think highest impact, highest feasibility would be these three areas. But Sarah and Jesse, obviously feel free to weigh in.
Yeah, I mean, this has come up a little bit with in the questions and feedback we've gotten so far from school leaders as well, and the advisory group. So I think we'll have to be careful when we present next time, just to make sure we're addressing this. But the out-of-district programming sort of is what it is, right? We do send our students there when needed. There are not enough seats. That is true not only for the students we're trying to place, but our colleague districts around the state, and it's a national issue. So it's a little bit beyond our locus of control, which is why, you know, we're not really heavily focusing there, but it doesn't mean that that is not a problem or an issue for us. It is. And yet, if we can really do the internal work really well, the best we possibly can, it may, you know, reduce a little bit of the need for some of those out-of-district placements. It won't take it away altogether. And the other piece of that has come up that we need to dig into and do some more, you know, longer-term research and exploration around is just the concept of a day treatment model, which did exist at various points along the way in this district, you know, and some people would like us to bring that back. I don't think that we have, you know, had the ability to really dig into that and do the research required to go down that path right now. But it has been raised, and we will, you know, I think continue to explore that. So we just, those are sort of at that far end of the continuum. And they matter. They're really important. And those are some of our students that most need support. We're doing our best to get that to them. But for the sake of this process, we're really trying to zero in on those things we can do a little bit before that part of the continuum.
Thank you.
Anyone else before I ask a question or two? Okay. I have just a couple things. It sounds like we need standard operating procedures as the basic minimum. And I don't, Jesse, maybe you can tell me or us, are there some that we're not going from scratch? Are there things that people wouldn't normally have on their shelf somewhere that you can pull out and kind of think about and use to generate conversation?
Do you mean in a specific area of?
Well, like when we're looking at the implementation part and, trying and figuring out who's got what roles and responsibilities, in the past, I don't know if there's any, back when, I don't know how old your files are, but
Yes.
wondering, what's there. And, because, mapping it out from scratch is a big thing, really.
100%. No, thank you for clarifying. So I think, just a couple things. One is, within the last couple years, we did convene some work groups with folks from the beach program and then separately from the FLS program, and generated, a lot of feedback that, I'm sure will be incorporated into this process around, what could be helpful in terms of, implementation, management of the program. We've also had conversations with, building leaders about this, over the course of the last few years at different times as well. There have been substantial conversations about how this could work. How do you sort of balance it? It was spoken to, but kind of the day-to-day management of programming that would be done, of everything in the school that's done by the building leaders, and then how do you bring in the sort of expertise and specialized support that these programs need, sort of different from maybe all the other programs at the school or other programming at the school. So there has been, certainly conversations iterating on those ideas, some sort of draft documents drawn up, and we would be, looking at those for sure as a starting point. I wouldn't say we're starting from scratch to your point, but there's more work to do. Yeah, for sure.
I guess I've a different question for whomever, maybe Tessa, looking at the information for a small in-house out of classroom placement situation. Is that something that we're going to see in the end we won't be seeing that at the end of February, or will we? Is that something for future investigation?
Sorry, Julie, can you clarify?
I think for the day treatment concept.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't think we have time to fully delve into that by March 4th.
Okay.
Yeah, probably not March 4th. Our team has started just kind of looking again, there's some conversations we need to have with folks in district just to understand, to your point, even in Jesse's comment, like, okay, really what had been done, what had worked, what had not worked, while also just what does kind of the best practice research say now around therapeutic day treatment programs and the capacity that you all would have to build. So I think that's something we may start, Julie, with like the advisory group, but not a fully formed kind of recommendation by March 4th.
Okay, thank you. Any, yes.
Thank you, Board Member Opperman. I just wanted to, I'm just so glad that all of this is out on the table, because it just feels like, we've been hearing symptoms of this for a really long time. And as a public official, I get to talk to people all across the city, and the stories that, we've heard from families and their students about how we haven't met their needs is just really heartbreaking. And so I just feel like that this is a really good step in doing right by our students and their families. And I charge this committee, I charge the board to really uphold that commitment. And I'm just really excited about the advisory committee, because I think one of the things that I've heard so much from so many parents is just their lack of voice and connection to the district overall. So really excited to see that piece. And I just hope that we can continue that, like, the specialized services are just now a part of all of our conversations, because they are such a big part of our district and so important. So I just hope that this gives us that foundation moving forward.
Thanks. I think that'll wrap it up. Tess and Talia and Hannah, thank you so very, very much. You've worked incredibly hard to get this much stuff together in a matter of weeks. That's huge and greatly appreciated by all members of this committee, all members of the board, and the community, because it's, as Chair Lentz said, it's one of these things where, we've kept hearing about it, and now we know, or we'll know more specifically, but make a plan, but to where we're going to go, and can be accountable to say what we're going to do, what, when, next, and figure out how we're going to pay for it. Because this is what we have to do. These kids, absolutely. Thank you so very, very much. I'll see you on February 28th.
Yes. Thank you all so much for having us and for your engagement and questions. And we look forward to continuing.
Great.
Thank you,
everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Dr. Warren, next up.
Ma'am, all right. I think we are ready. I'm not sure who from the team is starting us off. Is it Jesse Robinson? You're going to kick us off
Sure,
with the
I'll
next
kick us off.
presentation?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us here, and we're really looking forward to sharing our updates related to implementing literacy curriculum in Portland Public Schools. So I'll just, I think Angela's going to present.
I am. Can you remind me of the name of the slideshow, Jesse?
Yes.
Curriculum committee meeting with our date, February.
Thank you.
Okay.
As she's looking for that, I want to thank all of you for being here at this hour of night. You've all had an incredibly long day, and you've got only a couple more days before a break, and may you have a wonderful one.
Thanks, Julie.
All right. So thanks again for having us. We're really excited to share some updates. Angela, could you go to the next slide?
Yeah.
So throughout this presentation, we'd like to answer the questions, what do we want students to learn? How do we know they've learned it? And what do we do when they haven't learned it? So that's kind of a big picture. So this agenda supports that. We're going to start with a summary of our implementation journey. We're going to share some walkthrough data and some student outcomes data. As you might remember, we've already shared walkthrough data, and that really helps us to understand to what extent are teachers teaching the curricula in their classrooms, how comfortable are they with it so far. And then the student outcomes data really answers that question, how do we know they've learned it? So excited to share some of the data that we have around that. And then finally, we're going to be talking about kind of how we're responding to that data. So what do we do when students haven't learned it yet? And so looking forward to sharing this with you. Next slide. So as many of you have seen, this is a graphic called Scarborough Rope, and it really helps to answer the question or sort of illustrate what do we want students to learn. So the Scarborough's Rope shows how both language comprehension and word recognition weave together to allow students to read fluently. So students need both the ability to decode the words that are on a page, right, to kind of crack the code. And we are teaching CKLA in grades K through 2 to support students with that skill. And then the other side of Scarborough's Rope is language comprehension. And we have adopted ELA in grades K through 8 to really support students learning how to comprehend what they're reading, understand what they're reading, talk about it with their peers, and write about it. Next slide. So here's a snapshot of our curriculum implementation timeline so far. Last year, most classrooms, well, I'll start with, there was in the 22-23 school year, we had a number of schools pilot both of these curricula and offer feedback specifically around implementation, what kind of supports teachers need, that sort of thing. And then last year, most of our classrooms were implementing both curricula. So I would say it was really year one as a district. But not all classrooms. Last year we had ELA provide professional development. Sorry, expeditionary learning, which is EL, provide professional learning for our schools. This included a launch and coaching and unpacking of the curriculum. And then this year, really, our professional development is in-house, supported by the Attuned consultants in partnership with, of course, me and Allison. And this year, we have 100% of classrooms implementing K through 8.
All right, thanks, Jessie. I'm Allison Dame. I'm Director of Secondary Academics. Thanks for having me. And so I'll pick up here just to say that walkthroughs have been one of the main ways that we've been evaluating the quality of the implementation. And so we have 3 scheduled walkthroughs as a district, and then in between those, we are asking schools to do their own walkthroughs for a total of 6 per school. So this January, we did those district walkthroughs. We were in 30% of all classrooms, and we stayed for an average of 10 minutes. Our principals, our instructional coaches, and members of our secondary and elementary network teams joined the walkthroughs. And we're about to share some of the data that we found from the walkthroughs, which help us to figure out what our next steps are around supporting teachers in schools.
So this slide shows CKLA implementation based on the walkthroughs. And so this was really interesting to us. I think we started the year off really strong with CKLA and had amazing pacing. The CKLA pacing is very tight. And so we were, one lesson a day in the fall. And then over time, this is the first year still early stages of implementation, you could see that pacing drop off. So this is very clear for us. What we need to do is we need to address pacing in CKLA so that we get to all standards by the end of the year, so that kids are set up for the next grade. We were pleased to see that teachers are continuing to internalize the lesson and understand the overall structures of the lesson, and continuing to work on cognitive load. This one shows our implementation with EL. In the fall, we were struggling with pacing and we made some adjustments. We worked together as a team. We really focused on pacing, and the majority of our classrooms got back on pace, so that we're excited to teach all of the modules by the end of the year, again, setting kids up for success for the following year. We also made some big gains in cognitive load, which is challenging with the EL curriculum because it's very dense. So we're really excited about those improvements.
And in our middle schools, we also saw some gains. So more and more teachers are using the high quality instructional materials. And then we actually, and I can explain this further, but because there's 3 modules, each module provided an opportunity to a little bit reset on pacing, and so that's why you see that little bump. But I can tell some anecdotal stories that, like, the more teachers teach this curriculum, the more skills they have in terms of staying on pace. We're also, through our PD and our modeling, seeing more teachers being able to adhere to the overall structure, although this is a focus area for us. And also, like Jessie said, pleased with the increase in students carrying the cognitive load, which is directly related to the adherence to overall structure, because the protocols within the curriculum are going to encourage students to do the majority of the thinking.
Sorry about that. So the next question we're going to answer is, how do we know if students are learning? So we are monitoring implementation by looking at interim student achievement data, which is really, teachers assess students along the way, but these interim assessments are a way to kind of step back and look at how students are progressing towards benchmarks. So in kindergarten and first grade, students take the early bird assessment in foundational skills, and this is really assessing CKLA. In grades 2 through 5, students take the Amplify MClass, or also known as DIBELS 8 assessment in foundational skills. I will say, just a side note, next year we're going to be doing MClass K5. In grades 6 through 8, students take 3 curriculum-aligned assessments in reading comprehension per year. These are also aligned to the Common Core. And students are being assessed, like I said, on formative assessments that are built into the curriculum over time. For an EL, actually in both curricula, they have unit assessments that are aligned to the curriculum, and those are really high quality assessments. And then we're building in time for teachers to look at the data, reflect on the data, and adjust their instruction as they move forward. So this first slide shows some progress around our early bird data. As you can see, students are catching up. So just to, the benchmark changes from beginning of year to middle of year. So if you had, let's say, 42% in the beginning of year and then 42% in the middle of the year, students are still learning. They're still growing because the benchmark increases and it gets more challenging. So the fact that these are increasing is really positive for us. Letter sound is critical. It's a critical measure in kindergarten, even more than letter ID. Letter ID is like, you can say that that's a B, but letter sound is you can say that B says B. And so the fact that we're at 84% in kindergarten is very exciting. First grade non-word reading, it's still low. We noticed that, but it did increase from 27 to 45%. And then word reading also is still low, but it has increased. So we're feeling really excited about where we are with kindergarten, feel like we have some places to work in first grade. Second grade MClass data, this is, there's a way, the MClass uses a percentage that shows that kids are on track, right? And so we use that as one of our mission measures. We increased a little bit from beginning of year to middle of year. And then when looking at nationally where folks are across the country, it's very in line with that. Of course, we would like it to be higher than 53, but it's also, again, the beginning of this program and using MClass in itself. So that's where we are there. And then similar scores, third, fourth, and fifth grade, really tracking with the national percentages for benchmark. This slide shows that in grades 3 through 5, we have a relative strength in reading accuracy. So students are really beginning, like across the board, increasing, but also we have pretty high numbers of students being able to read the words on the page accurately. And that increases as you get older. So that is great to see. And then where we're still, next slide, please, in reading fluency, we're still a little stagnant. And I talked to the MClass, the folks there about this data, and they said this is very typical, that kids are really paying attention to the words that they're reading on the page. And what comes next is fluency. And fluency is the ability to read quickly and accurately as you're reading the words on the page. So I feel confident that the curriculum that we have will support students to increase fluency, but we also have some plans in place to support them in this area in particular.
Okay, and then turning to middle school, we use a different assessment, which is aligned to the EL 6-8 curriculum. And this slide may require some explanation. So what you see in the top table is all sixth graders in the fall of 2023, and you can see that almost 75% of them were not meeting standards, and a pretty staggering, almost near 90 of them were in those lower two quadrants. Those same students, this fall, as they took their seventh grade, you can see the numbers to the right are growing and the numbers to the left are shrinking, which is what we want to see. We're still not satisfied by any means, but we are seeing that the curriculum is working to move, again, these same students into the higher levels of achievement. And we see the same pattern with the 7th graders from last fall and how they performed this 8th grade when they took their curriculum aligned assessment. Again, the numbers falling in the percentage of them who are not yet meeting standards and growing in those who are meeting or exceeding standards. So not mission accomplished, but these are promising trends.
So now we'd like to answer the question, how are we responding to this data? Like, what do we do when we get it? And the idea is that we all respond differently depending on our role in the district. So as district leaders, we have provided time for leaders and instructional coaches to what we call step back and look at the data, analyze the data, reflect, and come up with some action plans based on that data. Allison and I have also developed turnkey PDs to support to provide to the instructional coaches that they can give to teachers in specific areas. So when you saw the kind of low data around cognitive load in the fall, Allison and I created a PD to address that, and it's been rolling out in schools in December, January, February. School leaders have, like I said, adjusting, making action plans, and those action plans often lead to adjusting their PDs or switching kind of like where they spend their time or where their coaches spend their time, and providing time and structure for teachers to reflect and plan based on the data. And then teachers, because the data is pretty granular, teachers are able to look at the data and see which of their kids are doing well and which kids need extra support. And we have structures in place where teachers can actually either pull small groups during Tier 1 instruction or provide extra scaffolding, or scaffolding is like just an extra support. Or they can, we also have some time in the day where they can pull small groups outside of the Tier 1 instruction or outside of their core instruction. All of these structures are relatively new, but many of them were, we built them last summer, and it's not like we're changing the structures, but we're really adjusting them, right? So the data informs the way that we use those structures throughout the year.
So as some examples of those adjustments we make responsive to the data, when we saw that pacing was low for the EL curriculum in the fall, we really emphasized in our PD with coaches specific actionable strategies they can use and work on with their teachers to improve pacing, and we saw improvement in that curriculum. Similarly, when we saw in our beginning of the year middle school walkthroughs that students were not carrying the cognitive load, again, we worked with our coaches on specific PD around total participation techniques and other ways to make sure that students were doing the thinking instead of teachers. And again, we saw growth there.
We feel pretty proud of the PD we've done, and we've gotten some really good feedback on it. We feel like the structure of us providing train the trainer PDs to our coaches and then them delivering them to their teachers is effective because the coaches know the teachers have a relationship with the coaches have been in classrooms on an ongoing basis. They know what's going on, and they know what teachers need. So I'm not going to read all of this, but you can check them out. And these are from across all grade levels, K through 8. And there's more where this came from. So again, we're feeling really positive about the support that we're able to provide teachers through this structure.
And I just want to add a shout out to our coaches, because most of these quotes came from PD that Jesse and I did with the coaches, but then they delivered in schools. So just want to give them a shout out. They're doing it tremendous.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay. So how are we responding this spring? each school is different, but we do have some themes that we found across all schools. So in CKLA, our walkthrough data was pretty low in pacing, so we're going to adjust the pacing by using data. So like what do our kids know? What do they still need? And we don't need to teach things that they already know. So we're going to be using the data to support pacing. As you saw in the data, fluency, well, blending in K2 is something that we're still working on. So kids know their sounds, but then they need to put the sounds together. And in fluency in 3 through 5, kids can read the words, but they can't read them fluently. So big idea here is more reading. Kids are going to get more at-bats with reading in all of our CKLA and ELA classrooms. For EL, we're learning from each other how to improve pacing and student engagement, and that those two pieces is the most important learning. So really continuing to focus on that cognitive load. And then, we like to think that having really high quality core instruction is good for 80% of our kids, that if we're really good at it consistently every day, then we think, roughly 80% of our kids can achieve at high levels. And then there's a chunk of kids that need extra time and extra support. And so we are continuing to focus on implementing Orton Gillingham. And that's been really successful this year. We're continuing to train more ed techs, train more special ed teachers and ESOL teachers to provide that targeted support in a way that is aligned to the other curricula that we're using as well. People have found that Orton Gillingham and CKLA is kind of like stepsisters. They're super aligned and they kind of speak to each other. All right. That's a quick overview. I'd love to hear questions that you have.
Thank you very much, Allison and Jesse. Chair Lentz.
Thank you. I'm just really excited by this. I know it's not where we want to be, but I just really appreciate the ways that you're reporting and looking at the data. And it is just it's just really, really exciting. So I'm just thankful for all of your work, both at your level, but then also our coaches and the teachers who are really leaning into this, because it is just so cool to see our kids growing and meeting benchmarks. So the only thing that I had a question about was just if there is still any resistance or big challenges that you're feeling, or if it does feel like we're really operationalizing this. I'm just curious, where is it still hard?
I could start with that. There's definitely things that are still hard. I would say, I think to your point, I think people are the data is really helpful. It's galvanizing people. It's people are getting excited to see the fruits of their labor. They're working so hard. They're really internalizing the lessons and the curriculum. I'd say everybody adores CKLA. It's easy to implement. It is, you kind of pick it up. You have to internalize it, but then you can pick it up and use it right away. EL is a different kind of curriculum. It's pretty dense. You really need time to understand it, and that is still a pain point. I think people they compare it to CKLA. They do different things, and so it's hard to compare it, but they're still comparing it, and so for good reason. And it requires a lot more kind of intentional planning, and we don't have as much time in the schedule to do that kind of planning. And so we're continuing to message that it takes time, takes 2 to 3 years to really know the modules. Some people are just teaching modules for the first time, either because they're a new teacher or because they only taught 2 modules last year. They're teaching 3 this year, really telling people that they're doing a great job, even though it's hard and they can't do everything. They can't make it perfect right away, and that's hard for people that have been teaching for a long time and are used to getting, feeling successful. So just to be honest, that's one place where it is hard. We have done some PDs to kind of shrink the change and really focus in small areas. But again, it's like keeps coming up. So it's actually something we're talking about on Friday. So there you go.
Yeah, and to build on that, at the middle school, it's only the EL curriculum, and I would be lying if I told you that 100% of teachers would be totally happy to be teaching this curriculum, but that is no longer the sticking point. Most teachers, are committed to teaching this curriculum. And a really positive sign in my mind is the more years a teacher has taught the curriculum, the more positive their feelings around the curriculum have been. So I would say that the sticking point is no longer that. It's more around us supporting teachers in capacity building around this really dense and pretty, just complex curriculum to implement. And then it's not rocket science, but it's just giving teachers a lot of time to plan with one another, to see one another in their classrooms, and to learn together.
Thank you. Nikki Mondo?
Yes. Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation, Alison and Jace. I just want to emphasize to have a follow-up on the chair question. Beside on the challenges for the operational of the CKLA curriculum, how many schools across middle school and or elementary school are not implemented right now? Or we are fully in the implementation stage across all the grades?
Yeah, we at this point, all schools and classrooms are teaching CKLA in K through 2, and all schools and classrooms are teaching ELA in K through 8.
Yeah.
Okay. The same thing too, middle school, Alison?
Yes. So King, as their EL, continues to work on how to link their expeditions to the modules. So some of the teachers are teaching 2 instead of 3 this year, but they're committed to teaching 3 as the other 2 schools are doing next year. So yeah, I would say we're 100% in terms of implementation.
I will add that Przemska has been teaching in the expeditionary way for 10 years. So there's a little bit of misalignment there because they've kind of been doing this for a really long time. So I don't think that they're behind. They're actually kind of ahead of us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you. And I want to go back to one on the slide on the early bird. I think my concern is between the first grade, and I think they had like a 20%, I think. Yeah. Right. No. Yeah, you just pass it. Just keep going down. Yeah, there you go. That one. So I'm kind of a little wonder because that's the first grade. That's the entry level of the elementary school. And then when I see we got those results here because we didn't start the CKLA, or what's the reason then we see those 20% here on the word reading here? That's my little concern about a language proficiency right here. When we have that data, let me just go with my context, my way to think about it. So because I look at the trend going to the 5th grade, because when I aligning with your 5th grade fluency here, I see then we have also some other issues here on with the 5th grade. So I see the first grade like a entry level and the 5th grade at the exit level to the middle school. And when I look at what Alison has presented, not meeting the standard yet, that percentage is right. So I look at that trend. If it's not something aligning with what we see, not succeeding on those first grade and getting that exit with those challenges and not meeting the standard in middle school. So between those, what kind of strategy we have with those students left behind who carry on to the area of issues on that specific word reading? Because He's just changing the language proficiency, because everything they have to learn after exceeding the fifth grade is just about languages. So I mean, and that's why I see we failing them in the middle school with a lot of non meeting the standard. Even though I see some a trend going there, but we still really on the first stage. So I wonder, as you as an expert, what kind of strategy do you have behind it? If it's not the CKLA curriculum to be applied, that's fine. But that one, it takes long time, like a long-term process. So what's that short term? Did I make myself clear, or is not making sense to you?
Totally. I mean, I think correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing from you is like we have this great curriculum for K1 and 2, but the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, they didn't get that. And so we're seeing the impact of that in some of our lower data. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Right, yes. But even though the one I'm going back to the elementary school right here. That's why I'm standing here. No. The previous one with the little ones.
Yeah.
First grade. So that means we see then we going down. I see 20% here. That's why I'm standing right here. And I see those are the students may carry over the years moving to the fifth grade. And the fifth grade has the exits to the middle school. So between those, we have those kind of students who really they are so behind on those different specific areas. So I try to figure out, do we have a strategy for those specific students where we can make sure then when they do have an exit in fifth grade, they can start going to middle school and make the standards. Yes.
So first of all, I should have put this in the slide, but BOI means beginning of year and MOI is middle of year. So we did grow from 27% to 45% with non-word.
Yeah, okay.
So that's some growth, but still, I hear you, it's only 45%. I have heard that the expectations jump from kindergarten to first grade, or I've learned that, because it's really like the year that kids learn how to blend. And that non-word reading is taking a word that doesn't make sense and being able to blend it accurately.
Okay.
So we're all concerned about this 45. We want it to be much higher than it is. And a couple of things that we're doing for them in particular is making sure that I talked about pacing. This is maybe too much in the weeds, but a CKLA lesson ends with reading. And if you're struggling with pacing, you don't get to the reading. And so you're doing all these little skills, but then you don't get to the reading. And so a lot of coaches are really working with teachers to make sure that they whatever they're doing, they stop and give kids time to practice reading with like 10 or 15 minutes left. So that's just an example of something that we're doing to adjust. I will say that we have some classes that didn't do CKLA last year, so we have some creative ways to like give them kind of 2 grade levels in one, if you will. And that's been challenging, but I think it will work in the end, or it'll play out in the end. And then we have a tool called Lexia, which is it's in the budget, but it's a tool. It's an online tool for foundational skills for our older kids, and we use that in grades 3 through 8. I would say the way to use it best is have kids on the program and then pull small groups. And so one thing that we're doing this spring is focusing on pulling small groups during that time. And that gives kids in those upper grades, 3 through 5 in particular, sort of extras help with the foundational skills, kind of that decoding part of the rope that I showed at the beginning, to support them in that word reading as they get older. I'm hoping I'm answering your question, Mickey.
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you, Jess. Thank you. Thank you, Julie.
And I'll just add, Mickey, if I'm hearing you, like these gaps are going to follow students and then impact that drop that we see in middle school. And I would emphasize that the assessment in middle school is different and it's very comprehensive heavy. It's very Common Core heavy. So that gap that Jesse was talking about between accuracy of reading and fluency, I think is going to impact it, because it's really not just about being able to sound out words but about to make meaning over the structure of much longer and more complex text.
Exactly.
So it's definitely a work in progress, but I've gotten to join some of the elementary walkthroughs, and what's exciting is that when you see kids in 4th and 5th grade, as we work to get teachers to put more of the thinking on kids and give them more of the practice, right? Because task predicts performance. So if they're not engaging with those tasks, it's going to be no surprise that when they get to the assessment, they can't independently do it. But as we build teacher practice to put the thinking on kids in 4th and 5th grade, there's so much continuity between what they see in 4th and 5th grade and then what the 6th grade curriculum looks like for them. So I do believe for those reasons it's the right work, but we need time to help teachers build those skills. But yes, I appreciate your line of questioning. We're thinking along the same line.
Okay, great. Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Is that everything, Mickey? For now? Okay. Anyone else?
I had one little thing. I mean, just to think about that gap between 5th grade and 6th grade, that drop from elementary to middle school is like common across the board. Whenever you have that transition, that you will see elementary, at the end of elementary school, students are performing at this level, and then when they enter 6th grade, they go like way down, and then usually they pop back up a little bit. So I do think there is some of that is due to the transition, not necessarily due to like a clear gap in learning. That doesn't mean like it's not something for us to worry about, but I do think like it's a big transition from elementary to middle school. And some of it may be like differences in standards between the assessments too, but like that I would say that dip that you see if there is that transition in middle school is pretty common, like across states and nationally there. So
okay,
thank you.
Thank you.
I will watch the time because I have lots of questions. And I was wondering first, how are the students reacting to the curriculum?
I think across the board, we see a lot of joy and excitement. I was in a 4th grade class at Reiki, and they were learning about animal defense mechanisms. And I mean, maybe you and I might think that's not that exciting, but these kids were jumping out of their chairs.
I think it's very exciting.
Good, Julia. It was really cool to see. I think we've moved into, for EL, we moved into more science-based modules for the middle module, and pretty much kids are more excited about that than the narrative was at the beginning of the year. CKLA is very engaging, and I do think that the more teachers put the cognitive load on kids, the more they're engaged, they're challenged, they're excited, they want to share. So I think the more we get better at that, the even more engaged they are.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback by just adding one specific example. Just yesterday, I was privileged to visit a 7th grade classroom learning about the Harlem Renaissance. They were looking at Jacob Lawrence's paintings, and they were having a class discussion, just being like, in painting 22, I see this. And to add on to what so-and-so said, I would like to say this. And it was awesome to see. I mean, it's no surprise, but like the teacher's interest and comfort and like confidence in the curriculum is very much reflected in the kids, but we've seen countless examples of kids getting super engaged with this curriculum.
That's wonderful. And you're right. The more they're engaged, the more you expect of them, the more they learn.
And I want just to add that doing the walkthroughs with the principals and with the teams, very well our students are really ready for learning. So I did not see, or I rarely see any misbehavior or classroom management needs in the classes. So students are very ready and really like accepting the learning. So that's all high schools, middle schools across the board. Actually, students are really. I appreciate them, and they're doing great job.
That's wonderful. I did hear though that there's 6 people going through the classroom at sometimes. Most of the time it's 1 or 2, I suppose, but 6. That wow! As a teacher, I would say, and that was an interesting thought, and I'll leave it at that. I have the word that's scaring me on this, and in 2 different ways, contradictory, is the word pacing, because and I started to feel a little better about it when you were saying, Jesse, that they're learning that they can adapt the curricula to their classrooms, because again, I get out and about and I hear things and someone saying that, it's just like, we got to get through there. And they do, but that following the curriculum so rigidly was harsh. Now, you need to cover things. So I guess my comment is, are they, when you're having that a bit of adjustment, how much can they adjust the specific pacing in the modules? Is it really like 1 week to the next, or is it 1 day to the next?
We have been working with folks to really understand there's kind of the 4 T's: task, text, target, and help me out, Allison.
Sorry, I understand. It's late. I'm sorry.
That's what I was going to say. It's late. I'll get it for you, Dusty. Give me a second.
Okay. Anyway, there's these 4 components that keep the coherence of the curriculum, right? One of the reasons that you adopt a curriculum is so that you have that coherence K through 8. You have the consistency across schools when kids move, all of those things. That being said, right, like you can't teach all of what's in the lesson. It's impossible. Yeah. You have to, when we talk about internalize, it's like really like understanding what is the target. What is the target of the lesson? So what are you trying to accomplish by the end of the lesson? Not changing the text, not changing the task, right? So if kids are supposed to be reading, you're not going to read aloud to them, that kind of thing. Right. And then within that, your kids, what they need, you're building in those protocols, there's so much creativity with it, and almost too much creativity sometimes, right? People can make it their own, but that's hard because because that takes time to figure that out. So I think I hear you. You're not the only one that says pacing is a hard word to hear. We're trying to shift the thinking that it's not about like, hurry up. It's really about making sure that kids get what they need by the end of the year, right? Because we've had situations, especially in CKLA, because we're learning the curriculum, where teachers only get to 5 or 6 units, and then it becomes a real issue the next year because the kids can't blend words, or they can't do
you're leading right into my next question. Yeah. What do we do in June if we're not there yet? Because
it's what we've done this year, because I think our pacing has gotten way better, but it's still not where it needs, where we want it to be. Not nobody's fault, right? Implementing. And
not all kids will get there at the same time anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, again, you look at the data, you see what they need. Some kids are getting what they need over the summer and many are not. And when you come in the fall, you might need to double up, right? So you might need to say, okay, we're going to topic, text, target, task. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison.
You might need to pull a group of kids that are 2 years behind. Usually the ones that are 1 year behind can kind of follow along and get caught up. The ones that are 2 years behind might need an extra dose. And so we're just creative and nimble and trying to give the kids what they need based on the data. What's great is that we have really nuanced data now. to be able to make those decisions. So I'm feeling, and we also, to Allison's point, we have amazing coaches. Like they're really good at what they're doing, and they're learning together, and they're collaborating, and they're really working with teachers and supporting them in a really.
The reading is the big flag for this year. That's, we hope, in the as it comes along. Coaching is good. We were talking at the end of the last year, beginning this year, of interventionists. Are the coaches doing that? I mean, if you have those 6 or 8 students that are not going to be ready in June, are they getting the intervention right now to pick up the pieces? And that's one question. And the other question, because I'm going to give it to you, because I only got 3 minutes. I promise people that we got off at 8 since it's so late. To think about is with the transition from 5 to 6, should we be doing K to 8 class buildings? And I'll leave it at that.
The big question with 3 minutes left, Dr. Oberman.
We got 2 minutes. I know.
There was a first part to your question that I wanted to.
First part was, are you using interventionists?
Yeah.
Are they
yes, we
heavily taking care of? Because if you have that many kids that are not doing that are not reading, that are not, I mean, that 75% are not there at all. Are those 75% of those kids getting intervention?
Yeah, I can talk from the middle schools to say, like, if the principals would hear, it'd be one of their top things that they want to continue to refine and improve. But the team model does allow teachers to meet each week, identify students, and they all have Lexia and a math intervention program. So those structures are there. And just very quickly, to reply to your past thing around pacing, I'm also wishing almost for a different word, but as has already been said by both of you, like really what we're talking about is, are you covering the standards for the year, and are you doing so in a way that puts the thinking on students? And I've been inspired by, like, the opportunity makers is talking about schools that are looking at the student, realizing that they have more than 1 year with the student and trying to make more than 1 year's growth each year. And that has to do with both what they're learning in the classroom and the fact that they're learning all the standards and those quality interventions. So that tier 1 and tier 2 piece. I think, we just need to recognize that our students need more than a year's growth each year. And so to invest in both of those structures.
I think so. And as Dr. Atkinson Dewena knows, I really wish we do summer school for seriously up through grade 3, so we give them a good. But any comments from any of you that you want to, before we close for the evening? I tell you, thank you for being here. Thank you for answering so well, and a conversation we'll keep at all the time. So I wish you all a good night, and we will close at 8:00 on the dot.
Thanks,
are we going to? I guess that's right. Mickey's reminding me. Do you have a motion, Mickey? To adjourn?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
And we'll presume there's a second somewhere, and we'll say good night.
Good night.